Check, check. Mic check. Check, check. 1, 2.
Hey, good morning. This is John Gruden, the old coach here in Tampa, Florida. You know, if there's one thing that I know, it's defense. Hey, good morning. This is John Gruden.
Hello? Ladies and gentlemen, please turn your attention to the screens for a special announcement.
Hey, good morning. This is John Gruden, the old coach here in Tampa, Florida. You know, if there's one thing that I know, it's defense. Defense ain't boring. But defense trade shows? That's another story. Until now. It's time for Defense Game Day. Hot takes? Yep. Games? You got it. So follow Defense Game Day. It starts right now. Let's go.
Lord Convention Center here in National Harbor, Maryland. The goal of this event is to bring together the warfighter, the operator, the industry, startups, everybody working in the mission of national defense. And that's why we're here today. These folks have been incredible partners. Thank you for inviting us here, and I apologize in advance for the mistake of giving me a microphone. Secondly, huge thank you to our partners, Forterra, The Arena, Prism. This show didn't exist a week and a half ago. These folks showed up. They understand the value of stories. They understand the value of humor. They understand the value of doing something different, so we appreciate you. And finally, last but most certainly not least, thank you to our men and women in uniform in the building today, here in the audience. We appreciate you immensely. There is no defense without you. We're here in support of you, and we appreciate everything that you do for us every single day. 2 words about why Defense Game Day exists. Our tagline is Defense for All. Every single American benefits from the people who keep our country safe, but we don't all contribute to it. And part of what we want to do here with Defense Game Day is make this mission accessible to you. We need all of us to stand up and participate in defending this great nation. So with that said, we're going to have some fun today. We're going to take ourselves a little lightly, but we will never disrespect the mission. All right. With that, we're here for a good time, but not a long time this morning. So let's go ahead and meet our hosts. First up, at 6'7", hailing from upstate Buffalo, New York, he was turning cranks at SpaceX, and today he turns term sheets. G-Money Garuth Acharya. Next up, at 6'5", hanging out in Tampa, Florida, the original founder of Kessel Run, he runs Rise 8, Mr. ATO, Brian Freddie Kroger. At 6'11", from Eau Claire, Michigan, he's a surface warfare officer. He knows boats, but not much about ships. He's Michael Knickerbocker. All right, gentlemen, let's grab some seats. Welcome to the program. What were y'all thinking?
Well, I'm fired up. As you can tell, national security is back in vogue.
Just to be clear, Garuth made it about 15 seconds before we went live today. So this guy, he's always on time.
Well, yeah, we're in the game. We're in the arena, pun intended. But I'm fired up and I'm excited. Thank you for organizing, Noah, and the rest of the team. And once again, fired up for all things on and off planet.
Let's do it. All right, so we're going to start. Guys, I want to, before we dive into the conversation, I want to point everybody in the audience to one special feature of Defense Game Day this morning. Over on my left, we've got the challenge booth. This is where you as the audience can get involved. There's a red challenge flag. You can visit with Mr. Tennessee and pick that sucker up. You can haul it right over here on stage. If you hear something you don't agree with, you get the chance to take on your hosts face to face. There's no sitting idly on your hands. When Mike screws up, you haul that challenge flag and we'll let it rip. All right, so guys, with that, let's dive right in. We got an action-packed day here at Apex, starting off with 3 big keynotes. We've got the Chief of Staff of the Air Force, General Dave Alvin. We've got Melissa Johnson from SOCOM, and we've got who we got? We got, I'm sorry, Liz McNally from DIU. How can I forget Liz? Commercial engagement. That's like where we live. So those three. Guruth, what are you expecting to hear from those guys?
I'm expecting to hear quite a bit on acquisition reform. How do we leverage commercial technology to, throttle it into the warfighter? And I'm excited about the nexus between technology and public policy, specifically in the national security realm. So a lot to be excited about, a lot to be fired up about, and I think in a couple of minutes this place is going to be packed, and I'm ready. Well, let's ride.
Get bumping first thing in the morning. Brian, what questions do you have for those keynote speakers?
Well, I want to hear less about acquisition reform. I feel like at this point, screw reform. All we ever talk about is reform. I want to hear about action. I want to hear about moving the ball down the field. I want to hear about real outcomes in production.
What do you think? Do you think they're there, or you want to hear how they're going to get there?
I want to hear how they're going to get there. And if they don't talk about it, I'll ask.
Brian's been on the acquisition reform train for a little while now. It's all right to be so. Speaking of salty strategist, what do these guys need to hear from you? You've been in the fight. You're recently transitioned here to the civilian life. Welcome to the other side of the equation. What do they need to hear from you about what's going on on the inside?
Other than the scratching my face fuzz on the microphone. And before I get in that, I have to say, Guruth, I was fully prepared for Penn State not to show up at the big game. So, on Wisconsin. And I'm really interested in hearing General Alvin tell us about, he's talking about the gaps we need to fill. Well, I want to know how we're going to maintain gap discipline. And what I want to find out from them is, okay, we're going to try and speed up acquisition and put things into our hands, but what are you going to do on the back end to support that? Because I'll tell you, when I'm sitting 25 miles off the coast of Syria and my stuff's broke and the troubleshooting procedure is unplug the box and ship it back to the OEM, that's not going to work. So how are we not only going to get the technology into the hands of the operator, but how are we going to keep it there? That's what's most important to me. I don't care about how we acquire things. I care that it's the right thing and that's going to work when I need it.
Love that perspective. That's awesome. So guys, let's do this. Before we move off of the keynotes, it's nice. Words are nice, but we're gonna put our money where our mouths are. It's time for buzzword bets. All right, team. We got 3 buzzwords that we expect to hear across the keynotes today. Innovation, China, and lethality. Our odds makers have been hard at work here. We've done some research. We talked to the speechwriters. We know the chiefs of staff. We got a copy of the speech. We know what's going on here. Over, under. We're setting the line at 6.5 on innovation. Let's go down the line real quick. Guruth, what are you doing?
Innovation's coming in on top. China is a close second.
Oh, wait, no. So over or under 6.5 times we hear innovation.
Oh, I mean, 100%, I would say over.
Hammer the over. How much you mortgaging the house? What are we putting on that?
I mean, I'm mortgaging my kids' college funds.
Kids' college fund is on the over 6.5 on innovation. Kroger, what do you got?
I'm going over.
Two overs, Michael?
I am John Daly on the driving range. I am hammering that over.
There it is. All right, 6.5 on the innovation over. We're 3 for 3. Everybody expects over.
It's 8.5. I'm still hammering the
It's
over.
8.5.
He doesn't have his glasses on.
I
so
don't
you're
have
gonna
glasses
to
and I don't remember the lines, but that's all you need to know. That's how we set the odds here. Are we still over on 8.5?
Well over 8.5.
This is an innovation-hungry crowd. All right, we're hammering the over on innovation. China. Give us the line on China. China, I think we're at 5.5 on China. What do you think? We go the other way. Mike, what do you want?
I'm going to take the under because we don't need to talk about our adversary. We need to talk about what we're doing.
Okay, we're hammering the under on China. Brian?
I'm under.
Under 5.5.
America first.
All right, under 5.5.
I'm over. And I'm over not because I want to be, but I think it's a dog in the fight, and that's what we have to talk about, sadly.
All right. Well, the good news is we get to hold these folks accountable. You here in the audience, you get to follow up with them later, and you can collect on your bet if you take the other side on this. All right. Last one, lethality. Guruth, what do you think? Over, under. What's our line on lethality? 4.5. Over, under 4.5 times we hear lethality across these 3 keynote speakers today.
I'm over. I think lethality is an important aspect of technology, and we need to win. Play to win.
Loves it. SecDef loves it. All right, Brian, what about you?
I'm under. It's that cynic in me. I think we're going to spend a lot of time talking about policy and reform instead of lethality.
All right. Well,
But I want us to talk more about it, but I'm under.
an aspirational over, but a realist under. And Michael, how about you?
I agree with Brian, except for the fact that, you know, you've got Air Force that wants to make sure people remember that they're relevant in the
Hey, now.
joint structure here. So they're going to have to talk about killing things so that they seem cool. I'm taking the over.
All right. Got a little friendly Navy Air Force rivalry here. All right, gentlemen, let's go ahead and move into stage previews. First up, we're going to talk about the Insight stage today. Garuth, break it down for us. Who do you expect to see on that stage? What are you excited about?
I think at a high level, what I'm excited about is delving deep into what are the strategic priorities? How are we going to leverage this innovation and actually make it happen? I think we've talked a lot about policy over the last couple months, over the last couple years, but proof's in the pudding, and we actually have to start executing. And I'm excited to see the technology actually come through. With Liz McNeely coming in and talking about commercial engagement, I'm excited to see what DIU is going to do in this next realm.
Hold up, Garuth. I'm sorry to interrupt you. We have a challenge flag, and making his way to the stage, we got special guests. We have Brad
I think we
Harrison.
finally need a Army person up here because this is a little biased. But
Welcome to the stage, Brad Harrison, Scout VC, straight out of New York. We love to see it. Welcome. Brad, we've got a challenge flag. You'd like to challenge Mr. Acharya. What do you got for us this morning?
well, I mean, clearly the investor version of the panel at Insights is going to be the one that's probably most interesting, where the rubber meets the road right now. You know, over the last couple of months, we've seen SOCOM bring managers inside the house, DARPA bring managers inside the house, and so I think understanding what the Air Force and the other branches are doing is interesting, but really, where's the money flowing and what are the tech that we're really focused on? I'd love to hear, and you're going to hear about supply chain, brushless motors, you know, LiDAR cameras, batteries, kind of these critical things that go into all autonomy and are 90% produced in the same 5 cities in China.
Do we have a favorite tech this morning from Scout VC?
I mean, we're pretty long Havoc, which we were talking about Saronic earlier, but
We're pumping companies already. We love it.
I like
Coming out
Havoc.
firing.
I like Havoc. I like the underdog here. They were just at Project Convergence, kind of running circles around any other piece of autonomy out there. So
We got a lot coming up on autonomy. We have autonomy power rankings this afternoon and tomorrow. A little secret. We'll give you a little preview here. We've got an autonomy fantasy draft. We're going to draft our starting 5 for a new autonomy startup. So more to come there. Brad, this is awesome that you're here. We got some friends. I was just talking to somebody who's like, I hope there's some VCs here today. I want to do some pitching. If somebody wanted to pitch, Mr. Brad and Garuth, we'll bring you in on this too. If someone wanted to pitch a defense-focused VC at this event here at Apex today, what should they be focused on? What do you want to hear?
Well, don't start with your $100 million valuation, because that really doesn't mean anything to me. I think, right now we are spending a lot of time, all things autonomy and the AI around navigation, sensor fusion, data, and all of those things. I think how you not only deploy autonomy to new and innovative platforms, but how autonomy plays a role with all of the existing hardware that's in the infrastructure. How do they communicate? How do we figure out our supply chains to the first island chain? We might not want to talk about lethality in China, but China wants to talk about lethality and dominating Taiwan.
Totally.
And I think we got to be ready for it by next year.
Garuth, what do you got there? Any for anybody who wants to give you a little hallway pitch, maybe a little bar side chat? What should they know before coming after 8090?
Well, I think a couple things. One is have a good opening line, capture the attention, but then go into the details. I want to know how you're going to have more robust supply chains, right? I mean, supply lines matter. The second thing is I want to know how you're going to be able to plug into not only advanced technology, but the troves of existing technology that we have today. Acquisitions is a little hairy, but, I'm optimistic on the near horizon. So a nice articulate plan on how you're planning to tackle the big pie that's there.
Awesome. Love it. Gentlemen, thank you. Let's keep moving on our stage preview because we got a lot of ground to cover. It's a packed day here at Apex. Brian, let's come to you and talk about the sandbox stage. It's a little different. We're doing a little collaboration. We got some sticky notes out there. What are you looking forward to there? What do you expect to see?
I'm looking forward to the first panel because I'm on it. But honestly, the first panel, we're talking about how can government better encourage and reward innovation. And going back to what I said about the keynotes, I think we tend to over-rotate on policy and even the word like what can the government do versus what can individuals do. I'm really hoping to bring that kind of bias of what can individuals do right now, screw policy reform, how do you get your stuff into the hands of warfighters? And I hope in general, sandboxing, I think sometimes the DoD spends too long in sandboxing. I think one of the biggest problems to transition isn't actually finding follow-on funding, it's getting things like ATOs so that you can get into production. When you can get into production, the money usually follows you pretty quickly. And so I would love to talk about some of the boring things that I think don't get talked about. Because whenever we do talk about ATO, what do we talk about? ATO reform. Instead of what are some of the boring technologies out there, like GRC platforms embedded with AI that can start automating some of our NIST compliance and how we do cybersecurity and getting ATO. So I'll be talking about that. And then we have the deputy CTO of the Navy. The Navy put out world-class alignment metrics, which I hate to give them a ton of credit because I love the Air Force, but some of the stuff they're doing over in the office of the CTO there is really interesting.
Shout out to Justin Finelli.
Yeah. And then I'm gonna go ahead and skip the ITAR panel because again, America first. I'm just joking. I actually really am excited for the ITAR panel because I think it's really difficult for small businesses to navigate, and a lot of the new funds are starting to explore that as alternate revenue sources, and it's really difficult to navigate. So I'm looking forward to see what kind of innovation they're bringing to that.
Read something this morning that says Europe is ready for their defense tech moment. I don't know what it takes.
Well, I think we still have the competitive advantage here of having all the national labs and everything we've built since the 40s to support innovation, as well as our leading research institutions, which is where a bunch of foundational tech comes out of. I think it's really, really hard to compete with that. I think if you look at some of these later stage startups like Shield AI, they're starting to announce contracts with a bunch of allies. So they just announced a huge software deal with Singapore, and you're going to see probably 5 or 6 more come out of that. So I think what you're going to see is Europe start to figure out the best of breed of technologies out of the US ecosystem that serve our allies, and you're going to see them buying those technologies.
Love it.
And then maybe the last one that I'll mention is I'm kind of excited to talk about the transition pathways. Actually, you're moderating that, right? Tyler Sweat is on that panel. He never disappoints. Ask him for a sweaty solid. You don't know what it is, but you're welcome in advance.
Also ask him about the ATO process. I think Second Front was basically designed to get around that. So,
for sure. So those are the ones I'm excited about today.
One of those is a real defense term. I'm not sure what the other was, but fantastic. All right, thanks. That's a solid breakdown, Brian. Thank you. Garuth, did you want to hop in on that Europe conversation before we go to stage 3?
Oh, I was actually going to go to our cousins down under in Australia, but I'm pretty fired up with all things AUKUS. You know, we heard kind of ITAR, 4-letter word adjacent, right? My takeaways, I'm pretty fired up with some of the relationships, not across the pond in the Atlantic, but are actually across the Pacific. And then the second thing over there is, we talked about talent and being ahead. We have phenomenal engineers, physicists, and all that are coming from the tier 1 universities. But the secondary aspect is, look at all these engineers coming from SpaceX, Anduril, Havok, Saronic, and the alumni that are coming from that, in addition to all the prior service members.
I think that's a great point. Back when I started in venture in the late 90s, everybody talked about the Valley, and then Boston was the second market. And what made the Valley so special is when Facebook got started, they could just go poach 5,000 engineers from Yahoo, right? When Google got started, there was that entire ecosystem, not just of the capital and capital providers, but of the engineers, the leaders that had scaled big organizations. Now what we have is we have this next phase of engineers and executives that have gone through the trials and tribulations at Palantir, Anduril, or we're at a smaller company that got acquired by one of those and have kind of seen that evolution. So I think we also just have a much more seasoned entrepreneurial base, and I would say August of 2018 is when they opened Army Futures Command, and we have seen, I think, exponential growth in the sector since that happened.
Absolutely. The energy is phenomenal. We're at events like this. It's palpable. That's why we're here. Defense Game Day doesn't exist in 2018. There's
Plus,
no
how else would we get you in that suit?
Yeah, that's right. Hey, just a quick shout out for Terra, Prism, and the Arena. Fantastic companies. We love you guys. All right, Michael, let's bring it home. We're right here at the discovery stage. Tell us what we're looking forward to today.
Sitting on a stage with, people that are experienced in the space, some of them since before I had a driver's license, Brad.
Before you were born? Oh, sorry.
But, I'm just overwhelmed to be up here with you guys because, I only left naval service about 2 weeks ago, still kind of finding my way and figuring out what I want to do.
There's a rumor your shoes were involved in your termination.
Shoes are fantastic. Let's make sure, are we getting a close-up on these things? That is fantastic. Lee Corso would be jealous of these. That is gorgeous.
Clearly did a rotation to Thailand.
Those who were not in Thailand with me will never talk of Thailand. Good thing my wife's not watching.
Thailand after party at 4:45.
Yeah. I'm still technically on active duty till 31st of May, so let's wait. So looking at discovery stage, is the first panel is talking about integrating autonomy into the current mission designs. And the interesting thing is that's being led by industry. And part of what I see is like we were talking earlier, all DOD's talking about is reform. It's actually going to take the people who got tired of doing it from the inside and want to come do it from the outside. They're going to have the greatest influence on how we do it. And, that's kind of where I started coming from in the last 2 years is writing about it and engaging with companies was a better way to shape how DOD's going to take action than it is to try and do it from the inside.
They call you the salty strategist. What's that about? Why are you so salty?
Well, because I'm a broken shower shoe, wasn't qualified for command, which means that I'm inherently inept and incompetent, even though I'll spin tactical circles around most of my buddies that just left command.
We love you anyway.
But that's neither here nor there. So I started looking at the tech showcases, and I was like, I'm not going to look up any of these companies. I want to be surprised. But then the first one I looked up had a quadcopter that they're mounting a 50 cal on, and I mean that just feels like something I'd do up in the UP. So it would make hunting a lot easier. And then we're talking about the contested spectrum, and I think that's really important because what a lot of people miss is one, we have to manage the spectrum in carrier strike groups all the time because we're trying not to knock each other's equipment or degrade it. And then we're starting to talk in the Navy about the fight from the Mach construct and trying to manage things at a higher level at the operational level of war. And getting into a later panel, looking at disaggregated forces, the RF spectrum is going to be more important than ever because there's more ability to degrade it and deny it than ever before, but there's going to be more and more of a reliance on it. So I'm really interested to hear from industry what they're doing about, being able to get after the RF spectrum management, which leads us into the final panel for today, which is there is another one about how to inspire innovation within the DoD, but I'm going to leave that to the fine folks at Purdue University to drive that panel. But when we're talking about battle management of disaggregated forces, one of the things I love is Drew Thompson was a CO of a BMD, Ballistic Missile Defense, Arleigh Burke destroyer, the John Paul Jones. He's now the Director of Strategic Growth at Anduril. He knows what it is to be alone and unafraid and not sitting in a 3-star hotel roughing it like my Air Force compatriots. But that panel right there, with Garrett representing the Marine Corps, we have, Bill representing the Army, and then Dr. Ralston with the Air Force, it's folks that understand what it is to be downrange and are now actually leading that approach from the companies that are trying to provide the new technology that can influence in a way that you just can't when you're sitting on a staff because, while I'm building quad slides, I can't necessarily actually put things into action.
Well, I think you mentioned downrange, and I think the biggest transformation we've all seen is testing in Ukraine, right? And understanding what the battlefield is like now compared to, even 10 years ago, what we went through in Iraq and Afghanistan, right? We always had air superiority. We always had freedom of movement. Brandon from Shield AI told a story about being a SEAL during, Iraq and Afghanistan and being able to move everywhere, and then going to visit Ukraine and realizing that there's, 200 loitering Russian drones ready to kill you as soon as you come out of the bunker. So that's where RF sensing, navigation in GPS denied environments, all of these different things are the new face of the battlefield that, we quite honestly, I didn't have to contend with when I got out in the 90s, right? We were using a GPS the size of that huge ass speaker. Now the rate of information and the flow of technology, and I think the forces are really trying to figure out, how do we work together? How do we string these radars together? How do we share the data? What does domain awareness look like? What is the domain? Is it just air, sea, like what is it all of a sudden when now we're looking at LEO and what might be happening in low Earth orbit? So I think it's going to be interesting.
Yeah, go ahead, Garuth.
Oh, I think big buzzword around JADC2, interconnected battlefield, all these things that folks are talking about. But
Still
no,
doing JADC2?
yeah, no. But I think before I throw it away, I mean, my hot take here is there's a lot of talk about testing in Ukraine, intel coming in from the Middle East. My question is, can the PEOs and leadership actually take these insights and move it into getting product and getting lethality to the warfighter? That's what I have to ask.
Yeah, there's actually a panel on the sandboxing session on MOSA. And the word modular open system architecture, like that term, that makes sense, but how we've actually gone about implementing it, right? When we go to a place like Ukraine, we just kind of throw that stuff out the window and it's like, hey guys, you could just do things. There's this thing called the internet. It's modular open source architecture and it works, but there's not 10,000 pages of documentation written by defense primes about how to do it that becomes a barrier to entry for a bunch of small companies. So I would like to see a talk about what are the things we can start removing. Not like we need more guidance, we need more policy, we need more standards. We actually just need to delete a lot of this stuff and just force people to work together and hold them accountable to working systems in prod.
Well,
A little DoD Doge over here, perhaps.
Well, I think there's this other thing that we have not discussed, which is we're talking about the changes in technology and the platforms and the tools and the drones, but how does that change the doctrine with how we fight, right? My college roommate is the current commander of the 101st, and when we talked to the 101st, they told us that they no longer have scouts or pathfinders. So how do they do their reconnaissance on their LZs? Well, they want to use robots. Okay, so now we're going to use autonomous vehicles. What's the doctrine change if we don't have soldiers and now we're using autonomous systems? So I still think not only do we need all of the acquisition changes and the technology changes, but ultimately the War College has to figure out, how do we fight differently? And, that's probably not the arena for today, but I think it's a big part of what's coming.
Are you ready to become a visiting faculty member at the Army War College? Carlisle is a great place in the summer.
Yeah, I'll be in Cape Cod, but I could come in for a guest lecture.
Do they do salmon suits at the War College? I'm not sure.
They let me wear whatever I want.
If he goes to the Navy War College, they'll let him.
When they're a VC, they let you.
That's
they let
right.
You
The
do
Navy still has a role called side boys. Let's talk about that on the side.
Cyborgs. Okay, that's Mike. Get in there.
So the thing I'd say about Ukraine is what it's really proven is you don't have to look for that technological silver bullet, which is what I always feel that we're trying to do in the U.S. is we need the best, most exquisite thing. When I was, sitting forward deployed on a destroyer, I wasn't worried about the super exquisite missile that was going to come in a Salva Size 1. I was worried about what was the thing that was good enough that was going to come in a strength of many. What was going to be the stream raid? What was going to be the swarm that was going to overwhelm my systems? Because at the end of the day, whether I'm shooting something that's really exquisite and going to defeat all the countermeasures, or I just send one more than I can intercept or defeat, at the end of the day, I just need things that are good enough and that can get downfield and have lethal effects.
Can you guys hear Michael's mic? Yeah. Okay. Cool. I want to make sure.
Who's writing the use case requirements in this realm? Is it coming in from the warfighter? Does it come in from the PEO? Are you? I mean, you seem like you're pretty fired up about this stuff.
I am fired up about it. No, so we have Surface Mine Warfare Development Command that's relatively new, and we brought on weapons warfare tactics instructors years ago. They rejected me more than once because I wasn't on path to command, but that's a different story. So, the
Not
thing
a
is,
sore subject at all.
The salty strategist is a little saltier than expected.
We are now at a point, though, where when we're taking lessons learned and uploading the data from the Red Sea, because we have the C2 environment to do it now, they are revising and updating tactics within 72 hours. Something that used to take us months to revise and push out tactics, SMITIC is now pushing that stuff out in a matter of days from it being actually lived through out in the Red Sea. Shout out to my friend Desmond Walker and the crew on USS Stout. They're sitting there right now.
Whoa, hold on. Did they, he's on a ship. Okay, I was gonna say we don't do unplanned sponsor shout outs here, but that works. On the ship, you can get a
Commander Desmond Walker.
It kind of sounds like how Brian sort of sounds like I don't know, continuous software delivery, a little bit of CI/CD pipeline, a little Kessel run in there.
There's an old gem in the software space. It's the Bezos Mandate. If you've never read it, I highly recommend it. It was leaked in Steve Yeage's platform rant when he left AWS to go to Google. But what it is, and I think this is amazing for DoD leadership, he essentially wrote a mandate. It's like 10 rules, but he basically mandated a free market. So like instead of coming in and creating a bunch of here's how you will write your APIs, here, it was just a bunch of thou shalt have a free market. And if you don't, you will be fired. And then he hired an ex-Army Ranger to walk around the floor at AWS and literally fire people who weren't complying. And I think there's a lesson there in that, like, we don't need, not only do we not need all the exquisite systems, but we don't need all of this exquisite documentation and standards and requirements even. It's just like forcing people to operate in a free market where they can freely interact with each other, and people come up with really great solutions that work well together in what ends up being a modular open systems architecture. You don't design that from scratch. It emerges organically from a free market.
Top down versus bottoms up MOSA. If you want to talk MOSA over mimosas with Brian, he'll be hanging out at the bar between now and when his panel starts. All right, guys, I want to transition to one other thing, because everything we're talking about here is, we need this, and then it's like, how do you build the data set around this? How do we know what things are working? How do we know what taxes are changing? And one thing that struck me in the last couple of weeks, and I think it's new to this administration, is the premium on storytelling seems to be going up. And maybe it's just because I spend too much time online and the current leadership is a bit on X, but whether it's Secretary Hegseth doing push-ups every morning, or General Alvin posted some pretty well-produced hype videos of some Air Force missions, including shooting down drones over Iran and stuff like that. It seems like we're putting a little bit more of a focus on being able to tell stories to the American public, to show them kind of what are your tax dollars buying. What I wanted to see. Sorry,
Well,
go ahead,
I was
Brett.
going to say, it's not only telling the American public, it's also telling our adversaries,
Telling the world.
right? Like, we're using that marketing as part of the deterrence value chain, right? Like, hey, look at what we can do. I do think that some of the Silicon Valley unicorns that have more money than some of the, earlier stage are spending a ton of money on lobbying and marketing because they need to win the hearts and minds of the people in appropriations. And what I can tell you is we have not met anybody on appropriations who has not invited us into their office to help explain better all of the things that we're talking about. Because, you can't expect congressmen to understand this super, super niche evolution of DOD, right? So, I think we have the people in appropriations making the time to have the conversation, but this storytelling helps, and that is what creates the soundbite that might get that program funded, and that's pretty important.
It reminds me a little bit, I think the last administration tried something like a foreign policy for the middle class, and I think Jake Sullivan said recently, it was like, yeah, that didn't really work. The storytelling wasn't there.
Yeah, you just have to use your storytelling for good. Like, are you using it to sell your truth to people, or are you using it to cover up your lies? I would say, I saw the Air Force in a post-Kessel Run era on the software side of the house. Like, we did a lot of storytelling, and then storytelling took off.
But
Software factories for everyone.
software factories for everyone, and pretty soon people were telling stories that weren't true. And I think it really set the Air Force back. I mean, I've been kind of embarrassed to watch what has happened to the Air Force software innovation ecosystem. All the while on LinkedIn, you would read it and think it's like the most amazing thing in the world, but none of it works. And so I think you just have to be really careful with your storytelling. And what I'll say is the corollary to that is, like you said, how do you know what you're doing is working? You actually have to measure outcomes in production, and those have to be tied to mission impacts. I would say one area that we don't focus a lot on, there was a big business process improvement movement a while ago. I don't want to get caught up in like buzzwords and frameworks by any means, but
We
like
love buzzwords.
we need to be measuring, just like in a
Bring
factory.
that over.
Yeah, like if you're doing lean manufacturing, you have to measure your value stream to know if you're making continuous improvement to your factory. Well, similarly, we need to measure our mission value streams better so that we know when we insert technology, we've actually, reduced the amount of time it takes to acquire a target, or reduced the amount of time it takes to produce the joint integrated prioritized target list for a major adversary. Like, we just aren't doing those things. And so it makes it really hard to know success from hype and failure.
Love
I
it.
would say Putin would say that our aid to the Ukrainians probably destroyed his Black Sea fleet, right? So, the targeting was working, and whether or not that was a combination of Palantir or Anduril or some other American companies, for sure there were Americans standing behind the Ukrainians in support. But I agree with you. I think, the hardest thing is to get something new fielded, tested, and get the data on it, right? Everybody's talking about Anduril. Anduril just raised money at a $30 billion valuation. Do you know how many times they've been to JRTC? Once, right? So what you're seeing, what I'm seeing, and I don't know, would love to hear from the rest of you, but we are seeing companies like Palantir, which tends to now be like a trusted platform for organizing data, is all of a sudden starting to show up all over the place, right? Because the people in DoD now trust that Palantir will be fully compliant, and if nothing else, they're good at organizing this data. Now, how does that work with this open architecture software? How do we access that data? What are the protocols? That is still, I think, part of what's getting evolved, but you're starting to see companies like that establish themselves, and I think that's good for technology innovation.
Absolutely. So before you hop in there, Michael, because we're going to have to soon pivot to go listen to the general, but I want to go down the line. Give us a story you want to hear or a story you wish you could tell on stage here at Apex today. I'd love to just go down the line. A story you either want to hear or a story you wish you could tell.
Oh, I'm ready to jump in.
All right, hop in there, Michael.
Because this was actually going to be my last point is, okay, so we're here at Apex. We're talking defense innovation. We've got a lot of great minds here. But at the end of the day, we're going to talk about the warfighter without actually understanding what that means. So what I want to remind industry is a lot of these systems are designed and built by PhDs to be operated by those with GEDs. So I don't care how great or exquisite your system is, if it can't be operated by the actual warfighter who doesn't have anything other than on-the-job training and hopefully is not an ASVAB waiver, then you need to make sure that you're actually designing something that can be utilized by the warfighter and not just, blow up the skirts and get a bunch of VCs excited.
I want to hear more of those stories about how you can just do things. I guess broken record, but tired of the reform requests and external locus of control. Adopt an internal locus of control. The story that I would tell is I was a warfighter, right? I did 7 years of targeting operations, used really terrible software, and I left targeting to go to acquisitions, got myself assigned to the targeting and GeoInt program office, and then I had this Kessel Run acquisition strategy. What people don't know a lot of times, outside of that craziness just to get there, my acquisition strategy got denied 3 times. And I just lowered the dollar threshold so I didn't have to get PEO approval, and I did it anyways. And the rest is history. You can just do things. You can just do things. So go do things.
Hell yeah. Garuth, Brad?
Go ahead, you can go.
I think a lot of this is a human capital issue. I think, as you said, you can just do things. So how do we empower folks to execute? How do you clear the BS? And how do you also inspire? the next generation of warfighters and the next generation of engineers and scientists and storytellers to move the country forward.
So I'm going to go on the other direction. I'm going to go away from the human. I want to hear what we really think is going to happen in the kill chain as it relates to autonomy. Because, you know, what happened in Ukraine when they hit that oil refinery, that's the first time they kind of like programmed an autonomous system. They gave it its mission parameters. It was not connected to a human. It did not take a human to, you know, make that final kill chain. It did it all on its own. It was successful. So, you know, now what we're seeing in this next phase of autonomy is there aren't people with GEDs driving these robots anymore. There are people with GEDs saying secure, loiter, transit, follow, do whatever the mission parameter is, but the autonomy is in making the decisions on the own. And if that decision is defend or attack, what does that look like when the autonomy is making its own decision to kill? And I think that's really going to be a big part of the future when all of a sudden we're sending thousands of autonomous systems downrange. What happens around the killing?
Aegis has been doing that since the 80s, which is why I find it so interesting. It's like, do we really want to let a system be autonomous to kill things? Well, we do that without a special doctrine. So, you know, we already do some of these things, but then we use the word autonomy and suddenly forget as though me shooting a harpoon, it's going to decide what to hit once I push the fire button. It's doing it on its own. Autonomy, we're just making, you know, dumb things that we were comfortable with. Now we're making them smarter, and we're less comfortable with that, which I find very interesting.
Before you go thinking we've got a couple of war-hungry animals up here, the goal in all of this, and I think it's important, you guys alluded to it and we should say it explicitly, the goal in all of this is to do two things. One is to protect our country and save American lives, and the second is to deter conflict so that nobody challenges us and comes at us. So I think you guys have covered a lot of ground. It's going to be a packed day. We are just getting started here on Defense Game Day. This is our very first opening segment. We got a lot more coming at you post-game this afternoon at 4:45 p.m. Eastern, and then we'll be back again tomorrow morning to kick off day 2. Gentlemen, thank you for being here. Garuth, Brian, Michael, and Brad. This is Game Day signing out. Let's get involved.